So our final speaker for Team 2 is Daniel Bramall. And Daniel, of course, is the president of the Independent Financial Advisors Association of Australia, and he's been a practising financial planner since 1995. On the business side, Daniel owns Brockton's Independent Advisory, which was actually the first practice in Australia to adhere to the IFAA's gold standard of independent advice, which is a pretty amazing achievement. He's also the co-owner of Independent Financial Advisors Australia, which is an AFSL licensee which actually assists advisors who want to build their own ideal independent financial advisory practices in 3 years or less. When I asked Daniel to tell me something about himself that nobody else knows, he told me something that he thought wasn't fun, but I think is truly amazing, and then that is that he is a third-degree black belt instructor in Taekwondo. So I didn't reveal that earlier in case the other side got worried, but no doubt he's very ably equipped to sum up the argument for Team 2. Please help me welcome Daniel.
Thanks, Claire. Thank you. Well, the fact that you're all here, able to leave your businesses and come out and think about big picture issues like this, tells me two things about you. And the first of those is that you're obviously successful enough to be able to afford the time. And secondly, it tells me that you're also thoughtful about your future. It's on your mind, you're thinking about it, you're contemplating your career. So it's wonderful to be in the company of successful, thoughtful people, and also people, I guess, who cherish, like me, independence. And so, should the definition of independence be changed? That question assumes that we're all clear on what independence really means, professional independence. And the idea of independence of a professional, whether it's in medicine or law or engineering, is pretty clear. It means the independence of the individual, the one who actually owns the expertise. So how does that play out in financial planning is a second question. The first question is, regardless of the industry, what does independent professionalism really look like? So first and foremost, it is the free and clear ability. It means you must be free as an individual to practice your expertise and to do so without influence. It also means that your thinking must be free from influence, and it must be your own. Your motivation for giving advice needs to be your own motivation and free from influence. The advice that you're giving must also be free from influence, and it must be your own advice. The needs of your client need to have been considered, free from influence, and your opinions must be your own. So in short, becoming and being an independent professional is about being able to practice your expertise within the bounds of the law, free from influence. Now, what does that look like in the financial planning context? And as it happens, there are three real impediments to independence in the financial planning space. And the first of those, the most obvious of those, the lowest hanging fruit, is obviously remuneration. If in your conduct as an advisor, you are incentivized in some way, you lose your impartiality. And impartiality is not discretionary. Impartiality is something that either is or isn't there. So how does that show up in financial services? It shows up as a commission. It shows up of any financial product, whether it's insurance or investment or whatever. A payment from a product manufacturer to someone to sell product. Or it also shows up as an incentivized fee structure based on transactions or products. The second impediment to independence is a blinkered advice model. So blinkering the advice. So if you've ever heard that phrase, if all you've got's a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail, this is where cookie cutter advice comes from, generally speaking from a very narrow APL. Now thankfully the ASIC has given us a little bit of guidance on that. We were all terrified, like Brett was saying, of this big sleeper. That truth is you have to be able to offer advice on every product on the planet, of which there are too many. And the ASIC has helped clarify that by saying you don't need to do that in order to demonstrate that you're not limiting or restricting an advisor's capacity to advise. Then the APL needs to be a little bit more flexible. It needs to be able to add product to it without some sort of technocrat, bureaucratic enforced limitation that makes it impossible to work with. So that's strike one for the good guys. The third and the last impediment for independence in financial services is influential relationships with product providers, product issuers. Now, on the one end of the continuum, this can show up as something that's clear and obvious, vertical integration, the vertically aligned business chain and advice model. Right down through to the other end of the spectrum, where you are dealing with this thing called culture. Now, culture is a bit more tough because it's invisible to the average client. But you can see its shadow. You can see its shadow in the APL. You can see its shadow in the language of the PD day or of the annual conference. You can see its shadow in the weekly team meetings, office politics, and you can see its shadow in the pattern of behaviour of the advisor. So how does Section 923A, this independence law, how does this deal with those three impediments? And it does so very directly and very clearly. It says no. No. Now that doesn't mean that you can't practice as a financial advisor. We all know that the relationship between an advisor and a client in any field, but particularly in financial advice, is one of trust. And you can have that without being independent. What it means is that you can't describe your services as independent because you're not. You're not. So should we change the law and change how we define independence? What we're really asking is, should we really make it easier to call ourselves independent? Should we lower the bar? And the answer is, if it's in the public interest, sure. But that question, the question of lowering the bar, the question of reducing standards, these generally are not questions of the public interest. These are questions usually asked out of self-interest. But you don't need to differentiate yourself from the banks by dismantling the apparatus that is supposed to be in the public interest. In order to differentiate yourself from the banks, you don't need to lobby politicians and try and convince them that independence is not what it really means. What you really need to do is to take ownership of the term and everything that it embodies. A better question to ask is, what can I do? What can I do personally? What can I do professionally to take ownership of that term and everything that it embodies? And by doing that, not only do you take away the banks, you also free yourself from the regulator, you free yourself from competition, most certainly from the banks, but more than that, what you do is you take back control over your professional future and your professional career. The real question is that worth it? We had a breakout session due for about 5 minutes ago, I believe, and happy to take all questions if you want to investigate how that works, if the session's still happening. But thank you very much. I'll hand back to Claire.
Thank you so much, Daniel.